In the last 8 months, I have tried 6 different sketchbooks. Some brought me back to life creatively, and some were such complete failures they gave me a massive art block. In my last sketchbook tour, I asked what sketchbooks I should try next, and based on your suggestions, I gathered a mixture of new options. Everything from smooth cellulose to textured 100% cotton cold pressed papers. Today, I'm showing you every single page, what worked, what failed, and how this journey led me to create my own luxury watercolor sketchbook. If you're new here, hello, and welcome to my channel, Voluptas Oculorum. It means pleasure of the eye. I'm Stephanie, a Canadian living in the UK, exploring the Somerset countryside and my travels through watercolor and mixed media. I'm inspired by the beautiful landscapes all around me, and I have been building up my sketchbook practice over the past 2 years. If you want to see where I started this journey, you can go back and watch my previous 2 tours, and I hope you find my explorations here today inspiring for your own practice. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start here with the Canson art book. It has Saunders Waterford natural white paper, which is 100% cotton, 300 GSM, and has a total of 20 sheets or 40 pages. As you can see, the paper held up pretty well. It doesn't buckle all that much. This sketchbook features a pocket in the back and a little strap that you can use to close the sketchbook when you're not using it. I always start from the back and move forward, and I started here by swatching out some of my favorite Roman schmal colors, which I was using at the time that I started this sketchbook. A few more pages of swatching, just some different materials that I was testing before we get to the first spread here, which are some landscapes that I did based on a bike ride we took in the summertime. Most of the images that I use as references are from my own photos that I take when we go out for walks in the countryside, like this one here, or even close-ups of flowers like this one here. During the summertime, we try to go out on the weekends as much as possible and see some of the beautiful sights that we have around us. In the UK, there are so many historic gardens and historic properties, not to mention all of the beautiful accessible countryside trails and the coastal walks that you can do. So there's literally a never-ending amount of things that we can see when we have time. But of course, when I run out of inspiration from around me, I can always go back to some of my travel photos like I did for this spread. And sometimes I even go back further in time like I did here, which these photos are from a winter walk we did a few years ago. And in this one, I actually tried out some pan pastels as a base for the sky. And what I realized is that unlike other soft pastels, pan pastels are not water soluble, so you can't really paint over top of them. Now, this spread I love. This is from a trip to Mallorca that we did. Same with these pages here, inspired by Spain. And I really love the luminosity of this page. Even though I was using some opaque gouache over top, I returned to the transparency of watercolor for the oranges. These are again inspired by our trip to Mallorca. These are based on photos I took at sunrise one day when I was doing a walk. That first one on the right-hand side wasn't as successful, but I tried it again in a different format on the left, and I liked it a lot better. These are some flowers that Jed brought home from his work. He grows edible flowers for the restaurant that he supplies, and these are some dahlias that he brought home for me. But unfortunately, I am not really great at flowers, so I didn't do them justice, I wouldn't say. Now we come to a mountain spread, and I really love how the one on the left turned out. I was really proud of the shadows that I was able to create and how I was using the white space of the page to let the shapes kind of take form. We have a couple more images from Mallorca here, one of the streetscapes that I saw there that I spent a long time trying to get the shadows right on. And then here is my first plein air view at the beach, which didn't turn out super good. And then a couple more paintings from a day that we spent in North Devon on the coast, just like walking around and having a great time. Actually, this is from a camping trip we went on where we stayed overnight in a bothy. We went for a beautiful walk in fields that were absolutely filled with heather. And then we went for this sunset walk on the coast and saw the most incredible cloud formations in the sky, which I tried to capture here. And this actually brings me to one of the strengths of this sketchbook, which is wet on wet. The paper, Saunders Waterford, as you might expect from a professional grade, really handles wet on wet techniques absolutely beautifully. You can see that the paint is so diffuse and soft around the edges. I was able to lift it off where I wanted to. And overall, it just really responded well when I was using wet on wet techniques. So let's go through a few of the pros and cons of this sketchbook. And I would say the biggest con for me was the tone of the paper itself, which is a sort of a dull ivory color. I felt that from time to time when I was working, I wasn't able to use the white of the page as the brightest part of the image, and that led to some sort of dull images. The second thing I would point out is that it's not really smooth enough to hold fine detail with certain other media, for example, colored pencils, although pen seemed to be okay. I was able to use quite a few layers and layer some different materials over top of each other. For example, watercolor plus gouache, as in this image, watercolor and gouache in this image, and it like really held up really well. Like the paper did not buckle at all. And obviously, one of the strengths I already mentioned is its wet on wet capabilities, where everything is just very smooth and diffuse. I would say that the images I love the most from this sketchbook are all of the ones where I was able to use the white of the page effectively to create a negative space in the image, and also where I didn't use too many layers so that I was able to just let the vibrancy of the watercolor itself shine through in the page. Overall, once I figured out how to make sure that the white of the page was being used effectively, I really enjoyed this paper, and I think you probably will too. Next up, we have the Seawhite of Brighton A5 Plein Air Watercolor Sketchbook. It is cellulose paper, which is bright white, 350 GSM, and 20 sheets or 40 pages. You can see here that those pages held up pretty well. Not that much buckling, just a very slight wave. And as usual, I started off this sketchbook with a couple of swatches. This time I was swatching some new Daniel Smith paints that I got, which I was really excited about using. And it always takes a little while to sort of understand the paper that you're using, and it was no different with this sketchbook. I quickly realized that this paper doesn't behave the same way. And what I find is that, when I'm feeling not confident in the watercolor that I have produced, I tend to go over it with gouache and try to fix it. So that's what I did for the first couple of pages until I started getting the hang of how to use this paper a little bit more effectively. All of these images you're seeing for the next little bit are from a little camping trip we did in Wales, where we went for a beautiful walk and we went to Dunraven Bay. We had a beautiful day on the beach, and I did a little bit of plein air painting, as you can see here, which are just really quick studies, and then followed up by some longer studies from reference photos when I got home. And I actually discovered after a while of using this sketchbook that the wet on wet technique actually worked really nicely on this page or on this paper. I found that I was able to mix colors really nicely and get some diffuse cloud effects. I just had to sort of get used to the paper, and that took a little bit. But once I did, I feel like I was then able to create some images that I really liked. One of them is not this thistle, which did not turn out very well at all in the long line of flower images that do not turn out very well. These are a few reference photos that I got from a Patreon, and I have to say, even though I was, kind of happy with how these pages turned out at the time, I don't really feel a strong connection to them just because they aren't reference images from a place that I myself have been. And so I don't feel like I really love using reference images from other people. So once I came back to reference images from my own trips and my own weekend trips and stuff like that, I really felt connected to the paintings again, and I really started liking them again. Now, I have to show you this tomato painting because I was really, really proud of this. And actually, this is not the first time I have tried to paint tomatoes. I am just going to grab my other sketchbook from a couple of years ago and show you what my efforts looked like back in 2024. So these are some tomatoes that my husband grew in his garden. And I think I was really stoked about the spread on the left. The spread on the right was my first try, and then the spread on the left was my second try. And I was like, oh, I'm really getting the hang of this. But then now that I compare it with what I was able to accomplish now, I feel like I've improved so much. Like I'm really able to handle the watercolor so much more effectively. So I actually had to take a little bit of a break from this sketchbook in September and October because I was away on a trip and then I got really sick. And then we had visitors. So I had like no time to work on it at all. And when I got back to the sketchbook in late October, I feel like my brain forgot how to do painting again. So I was like kind of relearning this sketchbook from scratch. And that's why like the rest of this sketchbook I'm not really that happy with. Part of the reason is that I started using a new material that I thought was going to be really compatible with this paper, and that is watercolor brush markers. I got a set from Kuretake, the Zig Clean Color watercolor markers. And the thing is, like, what I'm seeing on the page, and you probably see as well, is that these are really, really vibrant. And I think it's because they are dye based and not pigment based. So they don't necessarily jive that well with traditional watercolor, which tends to be a little bit more diffuse and muted. And so I was really kind of trying to figure out whether I can use these in my art practice, and kind of failing just because they were so difficult to control. I thought they were going to be a really awesome addition, but it turns out they're very difficult to use. So I'm not sure about that. And as a result, I ended this sketchbook on a gouache painting of an oak leaf. So let's take a look at some of the pros and cons and the hits and misses for this sketchbook. So let's start with some of the things that I learned from this paper, one of which was relearning that every sketchbook and every type of paper has its own quality and characteristics, and you just have to give yourself a little bit of time to really get to know what the paper is capable of doing and how you need to adjust your workflows to sort of make the most of it. I found that I really did enjoy even some of the mistakes that I made in this paper, because it was like teaching me about my own practice. So even the paintings that I wasn't super stoked about, I feel like I learned something. Now, when it comes to layers, this paper is incredible. It is really thick. It is really sturdy. It stands up to a lot of layers. And if you like doing a lot of layers and you like thicker, more opaque medium, this paper is going to work really well for you. Some of the things I was really loving about this paper are the ability to glaze and use wet on wet techniques. I was really surprised by that because it's not 100% cotton, it's cellulose, but it still held up really well. The only last thing I'm going to say about this sketchbook is that it is spiral bound like the last one, which doesn't allow you to work across the spreads. And I realized after doing 2 sketchbooks that were spiral bound that I really missed the ability to work across spreads. Okay, now we arrive at the difficult part of the tour, the Pink Pig Watercolor Journal and the Stillman and Birn Zeta series. After loving the Beta series in my last tour, I thought I would really enjoy both the Pink Pig and the Zeta because of their more smooth hot press finish, but unfortunately the paper was just far too smooth for the way I work. The paint on this paper almost felt slimy, like sliding around instead of sinking into the page. And I kept trying to force myself to finish these sketchbooks, hoping that they would be good for markers or some other media, but I just yearned for 100% cotton paper. That inner battle of forcing myself to use materials that I didn't like actually caused me to have a massive dry period where I just like stopped painting altogether because I was just being stubborn, and I kept saying to myself like, nope, you just have to finish the sketchbook. You just have to finish the sketchbook. You're not allowed to start a new sketchbook until you finish these sketchbooks. But I really didn't want to. So ultimately, at a certain point after trying with a variety of different mediums, I just put these aside. So after that dry spell, I picked up this 6 by 6 inch Etchr everyday sketchbook, and it truly felt like coming home. For those who have seen my previous tour, I used the 8 by 8 inch version before, and I loved it so much. The 100% cotton cold press paper just gave me so much success, and it just brought me back into a regular practice. Like, I wanted to try a new sketchbook, but at the same time, I was like, I sort of need a sketchbook where I know that I'm going to feel good about it, because it was just like so hard going through the previous two sketchbooks. So let's go through some of the images that I was able to paint. So I worked with quite a few reference photos from my September trip to Spain. We went to the north coast of Spain and did a big road trip. We went hiking in the Picos de Europa, and we visited a bunch of northern Spanish cities along the coast, like San Sebastian, Santander, Bilbao, Oviedo, Gijon. We went all the way into Galicia. And so most of the images in the sketchbook are from that trip and from reference images of hikes we did and places that we visited. It was really, really inspiring, that trip. We had amazing weather. It was so beautiful. And yeah, just basically a lifetime of memories. And I remember picking up this sketchbook like in December after I hadn't been drawing for a while. And I kind of messed up this page because I ended up doing markers on the other side for some stupid reason. But anyways, I remember picking up this sketchbook and working it, and I was just like, oh, this is so good. It's so easy. Of course, there's like a few little areas where I had some slip ups, like when I added the markers. I did some acrylic ink stuff along the way that was a little bit ill advised for this paper. But as soon as I kind of got back into just using like the pure watercolor, I felt like I was just hitting my stride again. So these are some pictures from another trip to Spain. Yes, we go to Spain a lot. This was from Barcelona. We went there for a very quick trip in December to actually apply for a visa to Spain, which, spoiler alert, we got. So we will be moving there. Anyways, more pictures from Spain. These are from, the one on the right is from Girona. The one on the left was from the Galician coast. And yeah, I would say at about this point in the sketchbook, I actually got a whole bunch of new paints from Jackman's, which is a watercolor company that does really great, amazing color mixes and granulating colors here in the UK. And just putting together that palette like really inspired me, and I ended up using it for like pretty much the rest of the sketchbook. Let's just compare it to the Stillman and Birn sketchbook, which was so like slimy and weird. Like the watercolor just didn't sink into the page. And then compare it to this paper where everything just, it looks more rich. Like there's richness, there's texture, everything works the way it should do. The hot pressed Zeta series paper just looks kind of fake. Like it just doesn't look like watercolor to me. I kind of ended up experimenting a lot with hard and soft edges in this sketchbook, as well as kind of interesting color combinations. So I got really interested in like the amount of variation in tone that I could do in some of these mountain pictures. Because like it's while it's fun to try to recreate colors in a natural way and try to make things look like photos, at a certain point you also have this yearning to just like express yourself more freely. And that's what I was doing with some of these mountain views. I had some really dramatic light photos, and I just sort of like use those as inspiration to go a little bit crazy. I did like this one little page of diversion where I was like, maybe I'm going to be a food watercolorist, and that like ended immediately. I was like, no, I am not the kind of person who can draw my food. Back to landscapes it is. I did like a tiny little experiment with pan pastels just because this little picture was giving me a little bit of trouble and I needed to add something to it. So I added pan pastels over top, which was the right move. You want to use them over top of watercolors, not underneath. And then for kind of like the rest of this sketchbook, which is like at the end, all of these pictures are sort of inspired by a trip to Cornwall that we did at the very end of December, beginning of January for the new year. And we went and we like had some incredible weather. It was beautiful. It was cold. It was snowy. We saw a lot of sheep. And so everything that you're seeing here is really like this sort of fast experimental brushwork that was like really loaded with color and loaded with expression. That's all I can really describe it as. So I'm kind of like, in a way, this paper allowed me to like move away from trying for photorealism and really get expressive with what I was communicating in these images. And I really needed that at this point because I had been like missing that from some of the more rigid experimentation that I was doing in the other sketchbooks. I had a big realization while I was working on these pages, which is that when I feel confident in my ability to illustrate my ideas using only watercolor, I feel incredibly fulfilled. Usually, when I start adding gouache or ink or colored pencil or neocolors, it's just because I'm like trying to fix a watercolor painting that went wrong. But this paper let me experiment with both hard and soft edges, with texture, with softness, with vibrant colors, without needing to fix anything. The only downside is the price of these sketchbooks, which is like higher than the rest. But whenever I find them on sale, I do stock up because they are really like a comfort watercolor sketchbook for me. So this brings us to the final sketchbook, and I'm sure many of you have noticed that whenever a brand releases a sketchbook with true arches paper, it sells out instantly and it costs an absolute fortune. So I started investigating. I bought half sheets of 300-pound arches and Saunders Waterford paper, and I built this a massive, incredibly thick glue-bound sketchbook with lay flat pages. And because I made it myself for only about 24 pounds, I'm not afraid to ruin it. The paintings that I have done so far feel incredibly luminous, and the thick pages handle heavy glazes and wet on wet effortlessly. So I've just started using this sketchbook. I already know that I'm going to love it because it's basically custom built by myself for myself. It's using paper that I love. It's in a format that I love. I have the ability to work across these pages to create spreads, or I have enough room to work on these generously sized square pages where I'm happy with the images in their own right. But I just wanted to mention something about sketchbook reviews in general. Now, I am the kind of person who appreciates a good sketchbook review, and I'm sure you do too. But what I have noticed is that a lot of people will work on one page of a sketchbook with one medium and then deem the whole entire sketchbook either a success or a failure based on that singular test. And I really think we need to be giving our sketchbooks a longer chance to help teach us what it is about the sketchbook that is going to be useful. Now, sometimes you're going to encounter sketchbooks like I did, where you just feel like you are not going to get anything from them because you're not even inspired to work in them. And that's fine. That's teaching you something as well. I do believe in testing things for yourself. If you have a strong interest and a strong passion for creating art, then it's a great idea to try like different types of paper and different things for yourself, because what works for one person might not work for another person and vice versa. This brings us to the final part of this sketchbook tour, which is where I explain how I became obsessed with creating my own watercolor sketchbooks. So I created this little Strathmore square sketchbook as a test, like as a proof of concept. I watched a YouTube video where somebody was talking about how to create a glue-bound sketchbook that didn't require any sewing and was also lay flat. And I was like, what is this you say? And so I had to try it for myself. I did this and it was a success. It worked. And so I was like, well, it's time to move up into the leagues. So I went ahead and created this B5 sized, which is 11 inches by 7.5 inches, arches, 140 pound, 140 pound cold press lay flat sketchbook. This is glue and bookbinding tape bound. And I have arranged all the pages so that the front and backs make sense. So like the cold press finishes on one side, and that's the big spread, and then the sort of softer finish face each other and create the gutter page. And so my thinking is that on the pages that are like where there's no gutter, I can work across the entire spread. And then when the pages where there is a gutter, I can work on either side of the spread. And like I created these sketchbooks back in August and they're still holding up. Like nothing has gone wrong with them. The glue binding hasn't come apart. The tape is holding up well. And this is like the moment you've all been waiting for, where I show you this massive, monstrous 15-inch by 11-inch Saunders Waterford watercolor book. I looked around and I found a commercial version of this that cost well over 140 British pounds. And I made this for around 34. So having my good paper bound together like this rather than as loose sheets feels like the ideal way to advance my practice. And if you think about like what you can learn from a sketchbook and what you can learn from pages, like what I realized is that I am never going to use sheets of watercolor paper on their own, but I will use sheets if they are bound together in a sketchbook. Sketchbooking is where it's at. I'd love to know in the comments below, do you prefer smooth hot press paper or are you a textured cold press fan like me? Let me know. Finding the right paper, I feel like is half the battle of succeeding in watercolor, but being able to afford it shouldn't hold you back. Realizing that I could make my own luxury sketchbooks is giving my art practice life, and it's actually so much easier than it looks. If you want to know exactly how I bound this Arches sketchbook or the Saunders Waterford monster so that you can make your own for a fraction of the price, click on this video right here on the screen and I will show you step by step. See you over there.